The answer past profound and wonderful Dharma is difficult to encounter in billions of aeons. I now see it here to receive and uphold it, vow to fathom the Tathagata's true meaning, to liberate all beings, thus generate the supreme bodhicitta. Let us continue with our class on the Surangama Sutra. Today we will continue our class on the part that the 25 great disciples of the Buddha and their telling of how they attained realization, also how they were verified by the Buddha, how their experience was certified by the Buddha. The majority of them had already explained their level of their experience of realization and expounded a little bit of their experience. Majority of them had already talked about it. Previously, we've covered how some of the disciples relied on the 5 roots and some on the 6 consciousness, how they attained realization through those. And within their descriptions, some of them explained their experiences, some explained their level of realization. Some are quite clear, some are not as clear. Some would express it in the way that saying that they had relied on certain roots or certain consciousness or certain great elements to attain realization. Now we had already explained those. Out of the 5 roots and the 6 consciousness and the 6 objects, so that's 11 plus eyes, ears, nose, that's 14. We have already finished the 14 out of 25. And now we are going to cover the rest of the 6 consciousness, the form, sound, and mind consciousness, mental consciousness. Now the 15th disciple out of the 25 disciples is Purna. Purna Maitreya Niputra. We had already explained his story and his name before, so I'm not going to further expound why he's named in such a way and his stories anymore over here. Purna over here arose from his seat, bowed at the Buddha's feet, and said to the Buddha, "For the vast kalpas, I have possessed unobstructed eloquence. When I discuss suffering and emptiness, I penetrated deeply into the actual appearances, and in the same way, I gave subtle, wonderful instructions to the assembly concerning the sacred Dharma door of as many thus come once as there are sands in the Ganges rivers." So Purna, being known as the foremost in expounding the Dharma, being the foremost in eloquence, in terms of the unobstructed eloquence, there are the 4 qualities or 4 kinds. Unobstructed eloquence with Dharma, in meaning, in phrasing, and with delight in speaking. Since beginningless time, ever since the vast kalpas, according to the commentary of Hands and Palms, it says that Purna had been unobstructed in his eloquence in front of 9 billion Buddhas, not only for 1 or 2 lifetimes, but in front of 9 million Buddhas. some of the histories of Banditas. For example, that's stated in verses that Sakapandita stated in the Treasure of Valid Cognition. He says that may we be reborn in lifetimes as the wise ones. And he said that for 500 lives to become Banditas. But Venerable Purna, not only for 500 lifetimes, for innumerable numbers of kalpas, he had been unobstructed in his eloquence in front of 9 billion of Buddhas. So he is very good at giving Dharma teachings on the Four Noble Truths and on various kinds of teachings of the Dharma. And he's not just superficially speaking it by paying lip service. Rather, the way that he expounds Dharma really shows his inner realization. And if one were to have inner realization and insights, then the Dharma that's expounded would be very different than that of the ones that do not have any realizations. So after he expounded his teaching, and he has such kinds of realization in depth, the Dharma that he teaches would be also quite deep and profound. And then he continued to say that not only for such a short period of time, but for as long as the time that is as many thus come ones as there are in sands of Ganges. I have given the wonderful and subtle instructions to the assembly without any fear. By giving the Dharma teachings to the sentient beings, he knows the roots or the capacities of the sentient beings. If you know the capacity of the sentient beings or of your audience, then they would not slander you or have any difficulties in such a way. When the mundane beings like us were to give Dharma teachings to the others, not all sentient beings would be happy to receive the Dharma teachings. If you were to know the capacities of the sentient beings, then you would be able to expound Dharma according to their capacity in such a way the audience would not feel fear or have aversion during the Dharma teachings. To continue with the sutra, over here he says that the world-honored one knew that I had great eloquence, and so he made use of my voice in turning the wheel of the Dharma. He taught me how to disseminate it. I joined the Buddha to help him turn the Dharma wheel. I accomplished arhatship. So the world-honored one discovered that I have the unobstructed eloquence. The world-honored one knows the quality of his retinue. For the same reason, our Dharma teachers, the mentors and the tutors should know some of your fellow disciples, whether they have eloquence or if they are good at certain things. We should pay more attention to their different qualities. Out of all the retinues, some are quite good in their eloquence. There are the kinds of people that studied really well, and their particular advantage needs to be recognized. There are people who have great eloquence. If that is not discovered by the Dharma teacher or the guru yet, maybe it's not because others have jealousy or have any negative outlook to you. Rather, it is because it's not discovered yet. So it is necessary for the Dharma teachers to discover the advantages of your retinue. The Buddha, for example, knows who has the best eloquence and who can disseminate the Dharma and who uphold the precepts the best. He knows everything about their retinues. So the Buddha knows that he has a great eloquence. For such reason, his disciple Purna to then disseminate the Dharma teaching. Purna said that in various situations, the world-honored one had certified me as being the foremost in speaking the Dharma. So, in front of different Buddhas, different Tathagatas, he had utilized his ability to turn the wheel of the Dharma in order to comply with the request of the Buddha and to give the Dharma teachings to the sentient beings. In various situations, he had given the Dharma teachings, the lion's roar, and within those situations of giving the Dharma teaching, he had attained arhatship. So if we can use one particular method, if we can delve into that method, we should be able to attain realization. There are some disciples that attain realization through giving Dharma teaching, and they're the ones that attain realization through sweeping the floors. So it would be best for you to rely on a specific method and persistently work in such a way, instead of trying to find another effort, another method, and trying to find another way at all times, because that is not going to be very beneficial. Let it be relying on a spiritual teacher or following a certain path. Your mindset is really important. If you were to already chosen a path, then it would be the best for you to insert all of your effort and then tread persistently on that path. I personally feel that some of the teachers nowadays have rather wavering mind. Some of the Dharma teachers think that I've been giving teachings for so many years, it would be the best for me to abandon Dharma teaching now. It is the best for me to engage in retreat. But look at Venerable Purna. If he were to give up on Dharma teaching and engage in retreat, would he still be able to attain realization? It is very difficult to say. Mainly, Purna had given Dharma teachings and then later attained the lion's roar, that is the arhatship. So the Dharma teaching is quite important. Some people would say that if you don't engage in retreat, do not practice, only listen to Dharma practice, it is not necessarily going to lead you to realization. Well, but previously we had already heard the various enlightenment stories. Some of the disciples attain realization through listening and through other methods, and this one is through the tongue. The tongue has two functions. One is tasting, the other one is speaking. So by having this tongue consciousness, with these causes and conditions, Venerable Purna had already attained realization. Within all of us, all of you sitting in audience, I think we have already endowed with those kinds of faculties. The 5 roots, the 6 objects, and then the 6 consciousness. We have all of them, mostly. So when we look at ourselves, during our propagation of the Dharma, during our Dharma teaching, in fact, it is very much related to mind, that is to consciousness. So through these causes and conditions, he had already attained a realization. And then Purna continued to say that I accomplished arhatship through the lion's roar. The world-honored one certified me as being foremost in speaking Dharma. He attained realization in giving Dharma teaching, while he was giving Dharma teaching, while he was speaking of the Dharma. So he's definitely known as the foremost in speaking the Dharma. We, of course, also wishing to attain realization while giving Dharma teachings. And then if the world-honored one were to ask what was the perfect penetration for me, and then I use the sound of Dharma to subdue demons and adversaries and melt melt away my outflows. At the time of giving the Dharma teachings, the four maras, the mara of affliction, of skandha, of death, of devas, those are the kinds of four kinds of demons that can be obstructed through the Dharma teachings. You definitely would be able to eradicate your afflictions during the Dharma teaching and eradicate the grasping to the five skandhas, and then eradicate the untimely death during Dharma teaching. Also, the Nagas and Yakshas and Rakshasas would not harm you during the time of giving Dharma teaching. So the four demons, the four maras, can be eradicated during the time of Dharma teaching. I really hope that the Khenpos and Khenmos and Dharma teachers and all of you Dharma tutors, during the time of giving Dharma teachings, I am sure that you will be parted from the four demons. I personally have this feeling that after coming back to Larungar, at the time of giving Dharma teachings, it seems that I'm surrounded by armies of protectors. As long as I'm staying here, I am fine. And whenever I go out, for example, the last 2 winters, I was asked to stay at one place for almost half a year. Not too sure what's going to happen this winter, but it seems that it's true that at the time of giving Dharma teachings, the four maras can be subdued. So from that particular angle, we should view Venerable Purna as our model, because in one's lifetime, it is indeed quite rare to have the kinds of time and to accumulate the merit through giving Dharma teaching and listening to the Dharma teachings. Especially it is the Mahayana Dharma teachings that should be considered as the most important and the most meaningful. Now, because of the power of distinguishing all the afflictions, the greed, anger, and ignorance, and so on, Venerable Purna states that because of giving the Dharma teachings through the tongue consciousness, he attained realization of the Bodhi. This is now the 15th one of expounding the perfect penetration. Now let's look at the 16th, which is by the consciousness of body. And then Upali arose from his seat, bowed at the Buddha's feet, and said to the Buddha, I followed the Buddha in person when he fled the city and left the home life. I observed that thus come one endure 6 years of diligent asceticism. I watched the thus come one subdue all the demons, control adherents of external paths, and become liberated from all outflows which were based on worldly desire and greed. Now, Upali, his family name was Chana. It was said that he was the one accompanied the Buddha to the gate when the Buddha left his palace and renounced his family life. But this was not too obvious in the sutra. Some commentaries stated in such a way. So it is a little bit difficult to explain. In that way, later we can look further into the character relationships over here. Now, Upali, from the later sutras, we can see that he was renowned as the foremost in upholding precepts. Mahakashyapa is renowned as the first one in aesthetic practices, and then Upali is known as the first and foremost in upholding pure precept. So he, over here, being known as the foremost in upholding pure precepts, he stood up from his seat and after prostrated to the Buddha, he said that ever since I followed the Buddha and then traveled across the kingdom of Kapilavastu, and then he witnessed the renunciation of the Buddha. Also, he had seen the Buddha practice the ascetic for six years at the bank of Niranjana river. Later, when the Buddha attained enlightenment, full enlightenment at the Vajrayana and subdued all the outer and inner maras, all of those obstacles of maras, especially within the maras, the ones that represented youth and lovely and all the desirable maras, as well as all kinds of maras, even the heretics. At that time, lots of heretics generated a great jealousy towards the Buddha, because that time there's quite a popularity of various kinds of religions and beliefs. So the heretics tried various ways to poison the Buddha, to release the drunk, mad elephant, as well as using all kinds of weapons to attack the Buddha, but none of them worked on the Buddha. So at that time, after the Buddha had attained full realization and liberated from all kinds of worldly contaminated desire, greed, and so on. Now let's talk about Chana and why I think Upali is not necessarily Chana. Firstly, Shakyamuni Buddha first went out of the palace and then saw from the 4 gates of the palace, or 4 gates of the city, of the 4 manifestations of birth, old age, sickness, and death, all of those 4 kinds of sufferings. After that, then he parted from the palace and then took a renunciation from home life. And then, since he really couldn't do so, he took the chariot by Chana, and then by relying on the miraculous power of the 4 heavenly kings, then Chana guided this chariot and then flew into space and finally would be able to transcend the city's gate. And then the Buddha shaved off his hair, and Chana took back the hair and the chariot to the palace. And then the king Suddhodana sent 5 great ministers to follow the Buddha to practice, and then those 5 great ministers became the 5 great bhikshus. But Chana came later from history, from the historical record. We can see that Chana should be rather quite respectful to the Buddha, but not necessarily to the others. He's rather quite arrogant, and sometimes he even looked down on Shariputra and Moggallana. And then at the time of the Buddha parting from the human realm, he had not attained realization. The Buddha later told Ananda, saying that if Chana really don't respect and don't listen, then you should temporarily stop, affiliate yourself with him. That might be the best. And then at the time the Buddha passed into parinirvana, the Venerable Ananda and the others temporarily stopped affiliating themselves with Chana. And then Chana got quite fearful, because being not associating with the Sangha, so he engaged in diligent practice, and then under the guidance of Ananda he attained arhathood. That's the story I remembered. So if we were to explain, if we were to say that Upali is Chana, then there could be some conflicts within that story. Because over here it says that he had already attained arhatship, and then he is renowned as the foremost of being keeping his precept. But Chana is one of the 6 bhikshus that's rather very difficult to tame. So one that is difficult to tame versus the one that is foremost in upholding precepts, it's a little bit difficult to explain over there. So later you can look into it a bit more. Now it is said that Upali, at the time of the Buddha's renunciation, also followed Buddha because he was inspired and he had lots of faith to the Buddha, and he also helped the Buddha to shave his head. But Upali used to be a servant at the palace of Shrudana. So after generating faith, and then he asked the Buddha whether he can also renounce from family life, and then the Buddha agreed. So he first received precepts, and then later 500 princes also came to the Buddha. The 500 princes also took renunciation in front of the Buddha, and then the Buddha told them to study precepts. And then because Upali was first, Upali took precepts before the 500 princes, so the 500 princes who took the precepts later than Upali had to prostrate to him, and then he became the bhikshu that is of a higher rank than the princes. But the princes said that I can't prostrate to this Upali who's from a lower caste, because Upali used to be a servant. But then the Buddha scolded the princes, saying that under my teachings the caste is not important, status is not important. What is important is the time of taking pure precepts. This kind of teaching is to destroy their arrogance. And Upali is considered as someone with a lower, from a lower disposition or lower caste. I didn't really have too much time to look into the stories of the disciples of the Buddha, so I'm not too sure if this is Chana over here. But I personally feel that it's a little bit difficult to explain and to connect the dots. If Upali is the Chana that was the chariot driver at the time. And then he continued to say that I base myself on the Buddha's teaching of precepts, encompassing the 3,000 awesome deportments and the 80,000 subtle aspects. Both my direct karma and my contributing karma became pure. Now, Upali said that by the teaching from the Buddha, he upheld precepts. What are the precepts then? The 3,000 awesome deportments and 80,000 subtle aspects. Now, let's look at the deportments. As bhikshus, there are 250. And then, since there are 250 deportments times the 4 types of activities, that is moving, staying, sitting, and laying down, then that's 1,000. And then times 3, that is future, past, and present. So those are 3,000 awesome deportments. Now, according to commentary, it says that 1,000 deportments can be out of the 1,000 deportments, or on top of the 1,000 deportments, then there is the precepts of the bodhisattvas, which is to tame and benefit sentient beings, and then to stop the vicious deeds, and then the precepts of benefiting sentient beings. So those are the 3 bodhisattvas precepts, which then it becomes 3,000 deportments. When it comes to the 80,000 subtle aspects, it is the 3,000 deportments, and then times the 7 branches of body, speech, and mind. For example, killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, speech of schism, and frivolous speech, and so on and so forth. Altogether, there are the 7 with the body and speech, and those kinds of speech, those kinds of negative deeds are considered as wrong deeds. That is wrong in itself. And then that is 3,000 times 7. And then the other 4 is greed, anger, ignorance, and the afflictions associated to it. So that's 4. Times 4, that is 84,000 kinds of subtle precepts. Now, in terms of the 2 classes of offense, the first class is that negative deeds that's wrong by itself, such as killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, and lying, all of those. And then there's also the negative deeds that is deemed to be wrong and forbidden by the Buddha as well. But Upali, Venerable Upali, can uphold all the 3,000 deportments and also uphold the pure precepts of the 80,000 subtle aspects of the precepts as well. And then he continued to say that my body and mind became tranquil, and I accomplished arhatship. In the Thus Come One's assembly, I am a governor of the law. The Buddha himself certified my mind's upholding of the precepts and my genuine cultivation of them. I am considered a leader of the assembly. So, since I have been upholding pure precepts within this large Sangha, I am considered as the foremost of upholding pure precepts. You can consider that he is being a model, and he is a person that upholds the pure precepts, and he's over here the translation is that he's a governor, and people would study from him and take his way of upholding precepts as a reference. And then the Buddha certified his mind's upholding of the precepts and genuine cultivation of them. So, upholding of the precepts is quite important with the mind, because without mind, then the body is simply materialistic. It doesn't uphold the precepts. So the Buddha over here certified his mind's upholding of the precepts. So he's known as the foremost and the leader of the assembly in terms of upholding precepts. The Buddha asked about perfect penetration. I disciplined the body until the body attained ease and comfort. Then I disciplined the mind until the mind attained penetrating clarity. After that, the body and mind experienced the keen and thorough absorption. This is the foremost method. So if the Buddha were to ask me, then I would say that the best is to discipline and to work with the body first, because I think after we have renounced from the home life for so many years, our body and mind would get more tame and more gentle. In whichever kinds of situation, we don't really have to worry too much about breaking the precepts or being contaminated anymore. So our body had already attained freedom. We would not jump and do all kinds of inappropriate, to carry all kinds of inappropriate deportments anymore. So he firstly would protect his body and then protect his mind. This is how he protected his precepts. Now, in terms of the pratimoksha vow, it is mainly to refrain one's activity and actions. And then the bodhisattva vow is to the mind. And then the samaya vow is due to the secret of mind. So those are the differences. And in terms of the systematic way of protecting one's mind is, firstly, you have to refrain from your body and then slowly to body and mind. By relying on the precept to attain realization is to first, by utilizing or relying on the body to protect the mind, and then one can attain realization. This is the Mahayana teaching. This is the sixth paramita. Also, all of those kinds of teachings and precepts are based on the mind still. So the precepts is still on the mind, but at the beginning it is the body and the mind. After they are all penetrated, he attained realization. So Upali is the body consciousness. Now the 17th is Madhikalayana. Madhikalayana is the foremost in miraculous penetrations. And we've known that Shariputra is the foremost in wisdom. So Madhikalayana, out of the consciousness, he is the one that attained realization through the mind consciousness. Upali attained realization by upholding pure precepts. In fact, even if you do not recognize the nature of the pure precepts, you can still attain realization by relying on the pure precepts. All of the precepts, even the most subtle precepts. And then great Madhikalayana arose from his seat, bowed at the Buddha's feet, and said to the Buddha, "Once when I was out on the road begging for food, I met the three Kashyapa brothers, Uruvilva, Gaya, and Nadi, who proclaimed for me the thus come once profound principle of causes and conditions. I immediately brought forth resolve and obtain a great understanding." Madhikalayana at first also arose from his seat and then prostrated to the Buddha's feet, and then said that how I attained realization at the beginning was that I was out on the road to beg for alms, and then on the way I met the three Kashyapa brothers. The three brothers of the Kashyapa. Also, Shariputra encountered them, same as Madhikalayana. Those kinds of stories of how and what happened, in fact, are included in the Mahaprajnaparamita Shastra. When Madhikalayana encountered the three Kashyapa brothers, there is the Uruvilva. Uruvilva's name means papaya growth, and he got the name because he had a growth on his body that was in the shape like a papaya. And then the second brother is named as Gaya, and Gaya was named after a mountain. I had already been there. We were living when I went to Bodh Gaya, and then we were visiting the Vajrayana in India. We lived there, and I looked at the Mount Gaya through the window, but didn't really go there. But that's where his name comes from the Mount Gaya. And then Nadi was named after a river. Each of those three Kashyapas, so for example, Uruvilva Kashyapa, Gaya Kashyapa, and Nadi Kashyapa, those Kashyapas took refuge with the Buddha, and then after they took refuge from the Buddha, and then studied the teachings from the Buddha, and understood the Dharma teachings on the causes and conditions. So they were talking to Vajrayana on the way. They were chatting at the same time. And then at the time of talking on the profound principle, causes and conditions, Vajrayana started to contemplate upon it. At the time of contemplating upon it, the causes and conditions for his realization had already matured, so he attained realization. After he attained realization, he obtained great miraculous penetration. For that reason, he is known as the foremost in miraculous penetration. In our history, we can see that there are a little bit of variation of the story of Mahakashapa. But I think when we look at history and the different details in history, we should understand that the key factors that's emphasized from different perspectives of history, as histories are different. So by relying on the profound Dharma teaching of causes and conditions and contemplating upon it, Vajrayana at that time quickly attained realization as well as obtained miraculous penetration. I think nowadays people tend to have a very black and white view on history. For example, some scholars would insist that his view is correct, but the other one is not. And then they would find all kinds of reasons to verify their personal perspective. In fact, I think that is not a correct way of looking at history. For example, whenever we look at the biography of certain people, maybe two people are writing on the same person's biography, but the emphasis and the telling would be very different. But it doesn't mean that one is correct and the other one is not. So sometimes we don't necessarily have to be that rigid. We need to know that throughout history, nowadays, the scholars at the times of studying history, the most important thing to them is the time. First of all, when is it? Is it BCE, CE, or what did this person do in the next period of time, and how they correlated to the other kingdoms or the kings of other countries, and so on and so forth. The scholars would pay great attention to those details, but when it comes to the Buddhist context, when we talk about the sentient beings have unfathomable karmic force or karmic retributions, and then the blessings of the Buddha is beyond our conception. Also, the manifestations of the appearance of sentient beings are uncertain. If you were to further delve into these parts of the studies, I think the outcome would be very different. But if they were to keep going with their particular view and then come to the understanding of what is correct and what is not, just based on their perspective, that would not be very fruitful. And then at that time, the thus come one accepted me. The Kashapa was the Kashaya was on my body and my hair fell out by itself. Wouldn't that be quite convenient and wonderful if at the time of taking the monastic vow, your hair can fall out by itself? Wouldn't that be the most convenient? Then Vajrayana at first encountered the three brothers, and then he went to the Buddha, and then he wore the kashaya, the robes, and then his hair and beard just naturally fell off. And then he started to roam about without any graspings, without holding on to anything, with great freedom, because at that time he had already attained realization. His miraculous penetration that's brought forth by mental consciousness were completely developed. For that reason, in Buddhism, he is considered as the foremost in miraculous penetration. And then he continued to say that not only the world-honored one, but the thus come ones of the 10 directions praised my spiritual powers as perfectly clear and pure, masterful and fearless. The Buddhas asked about penetration, the perfect penetration by means of a spiral-like attention to the profound light of my mind was reviewed. Just as muddy water clears, eventually it became pure and dazzling. This is the foremost method. So not only the Buddha Shakyamuni praised my miraculous penetration to be the foremost. In fact, all the Tathagatas of the 10 directions praised my miraculous powers as well. And he started saying that in this perfect and luminous and pure insights naturally manifested in this world. For that reason, it is masterful and fearless. With Madhikalayana's miraculous penetrations, we wouldn't be fearful at all either. We wouldn't be afraid of wolves, of asuras, of kimnaras, because with the great miraculous penetration, we can just transform ourselves into a breeze of wind when there is a horrifying knocking on the door, and then we can traverse back and forth in the space. So there's nothing to be afraid anymore. And then he continued to say that the Buddha asked about the perfect penetration by means of a spiral-like attention to the profound. Now the spiral-like, it means that his consciousness has already transformed into pure wisdom. And according to some commentary, it says that this spiral-like attention demonstrates the accomplishment of meditation. So his consciousness transformed to be pure and no longer being bounded by the external phenomena. For that reason, it is pure and it is clear and luminous. And then the next part talks about my mind was reviewed, and this part talks about wisdom. So the light coming forth from the mind, which is wisdom, is so pure and it is just like the muddy water clears. So that is also consciousness transforming into pure wisdom. For that reason, Madhikalayana considers that the most important is to review the mind consciousness. What is the most important, the foremost important to you? What is the foremost method? The ghee butter? Retreat? Have you finished Have you finished your 8 kilos of ghee? Do you have a refrigerator? Without a refrigerator, it's not going to work, right? So what is the best and foremost method? Retreat? Okay. This is mind consciousness. This is the foremost important method to Madhikalayana. The next one is Utsushma. In Tibetan, it's Lozapa, and that's a little bit similar to Vimalakirti, but probably not the same person. Not sure if this is another name of Vajrapani. Previously, we had already completed 5 roots, 6 objects, and 6 consciousness. Now, being the 18th disciple, he relied on the fire element to attain realization. Normally, the orders of the four great elements follows the earth, water, fire, and wind. But over here, why do we study fire first? It is because fire represents greed. In order to distract all the afflictions, we really need to start from greed. The Pratimoksha vow usually starts from greed as well. So we need to start from fire, and then in order to establish, then we start from the ground. In order to destroy or destruct, then we start from the fire element. In such a way, then all the merits and qualities would be able to produce. And over here, let's look at the sutra. It says that Vajrayana came before the Buddha, put his palms together, bowed at the Buddha's feet, and said to the Buddha, why Vajrayana did not arise from his seat? It is because he is a protector. Being a protector, he can't sit over there. He has to stand by the side. So he didn't, like the other disciples, rose from their seats and then go to the Buddha and then prostrate. Rather, he just directly came before the Buddha and put his palms together, bowed at the Buddha's feet, and said to the Buddha, I can still remember how many kalpas ago I was filled with excessive greed and desire. A long time ago, many kalpas ago, he was reborn as someone with a great desire. There was a Buddha in the world named the King of Emptiness. He said that the people with too much desire turn into raging mass of fire. He taught me to contemplate the coolness and warmth throughout my entire body. Now, the King of Emptiness, if you remember in the Avatamsaka Sutra, it talks about Ananda, and the Buddha at that time went in front of King of Emptiness, Tathagata, and made aspiration together. And in the same timeline, at the time, Vajrayana also made aspiration, or also studied before the King of Emptiness, Tathagata. So, King of Emptiness, Tathagata mainly asked him to work with his affliction, and then, according to some commentaries, it says that though that they were being in front of the Tathagata at the same period of time, but Vajrayana had a great amount of desire. For that reason, he did not attain realization, but Shakyamuni Buddha had already attained full enlightenment a long time ago. But the Buddha at that time told him that for people with great desire, then they would turn into a raging mass of fire. Even at the time of being alive, the fire of desire would burn one's body and mind. At the time of death, then the fire of karma would also burn oneself. The root of afflictions is desire. If you have a great deal of desire, then that could give birth to aggression, to jealousy, to arrogance, and all kinds of afflictions. That is why the Buddha talks about one should work with desire first. Whenever we talk about the three poisons, we talk about desire, aggression, and ignorance. The reason it is placed in such a sequence is because if you work with greed, which is more coarse, then you can work with anger, then you can work with the subtle ignorance. So once you work with greed and anger first, then all the other afflictions would be easy to work with. Over here, he said that the Buddha at the time told him to practice to work with the greed, so that at the time of death he would no longer be born in hell realm or the Preta ghost realm. And then the Buddha taught him the teaching of coolness and warmth throughout the entire body. And this kinds of practice is almost similar to the contemplation upon impurity. There's a constant change of cold and warm, and to visualize the body as well as using this kind of breath to contemplate upon the mind. And then he continued to say that a spiritual light coalesced the inside and transformed my thoughts of excessive lust into the fire of wisdom. At the time that he was contemplating upon the luminosity of mind, the nature of greed, the nature of desire, and when he was just contemplating upon the warmth and coolness and contemplating on the view of impurity at that time, looking at the mind, his desire was completely dissolved. It is just like when we talk about how consciousness transforming into wisdom. At the end, desire turned into the fire of wisdom. That's how he attained realization. So to him, fire is the most important. The poor beings in the desire realm, let it be apparent or not so apparent, in fact, the fire of desire has been burning at the same time. But I think to majority of the monastics, it is much better. But of course, at the beginning, it is not easy to give up on everything all at once. The deportments and then the body and all of those. In fact, it can be beneficial to work with desire, that is for the monastics. But the ordinary mundane beings of the desire realm, the fire of desire is the most difficult. But if one can transform such fire of desire into the fire of wisdom, then that would be the best, because at the time of attaining realization, he practiced in such a way. And then he continued to say that after that, when any of the Buddha summoned me, they used the name Firehead. So after his contemplation succeeded and practice succeeded, the Tathagatas all rejoiced his realization. Unlike some of us, after practicing for a long period of time, they not only had not put out the fire of desire, but to generate the fire of regression. So the next part talks about how the rest of the Buddhas used to call him the name as a firehead. When I was little, the local grown-ups called me the redhead child. I used to get really mad about that nickname because when I was little, for some reason, my hair looks rather red. And people would call me the redhead from the Yupul family. They would tease me in such a way, so I would be quite embarrassed about it. But look at Utrushma, he succeeded in his practice by the element of fire. Using the element of fire, he burned the afflictions in his mind stream. So from the strength of the firelight, some Samadhi, I accomplished arhatship. He said that fire is so important to me. Every time I look at fire, I feel quite close to it. But I think for people with great desire, it's difficult for them to transform that into fire of wisdom. Not only they cannot transform the fire into wisdom, they may burn themselves. And then they may even continue that kind of burning in the future lives, to be burned by afflictions in the three lower realms. And then he continued to say that I made a great vow that when each of the Buddhas accomplishes that way, I will be the powerful knight and in person subdue the demon's hatred. So he made the aspiration that after Buddha, all the Buddha attain full enlightenment, he will transform into the great powerful knight, great powerful warrior, and holding the Vajra, and then has a firelight on top of his head. He will be a protector. In the commentary, it says that there was once a king, and he had 1,000 sons. And those 1,000 sons became the Buddhas of the good aeon, and Shakyamuni Buddha was the fourth Buddha. And then from another concubine of the king, the other concubine has 2 sons, and those 2 sons each made the aspiration to one protect the Dharma and the other one to ask or request for the turning of the Dharma. For such reason, the first one that vowed to protect the Dharma became the Vajrapani Bodhisattva, and then the one made the aspiration to request for the Dharma to turn the Dharma wheel became the Indra. And then that's included in the Sutra of Right Mindfulness. And then the Buddha asked about perfect penetration. I used a tentative contemplation of the effect of heat in my body and mind until it became unobstructed and penetrating, and all my outflows were consumed. I produced a blazing brilliance and ascended to enlightenment. This is the foremost method. Now, to him, the heat is the most important. At the time of attaining enlightenment, or attaining certain realization, or to gain certain big shifts in life. The condition could be a book, could be a Dharma teacher, could be a Dharma assembly, could be simply an interaction with the others. It would be the best to attain realization through those kinds of conditions, but even if not, those can be the points of turning of your lifetime. Those kinds of causes and conditions are indeed really important. So whenever we encounter those kinds of causes and conditions that helps us to turn our mind, we need to be very grateful to whomsoever or whatsoever provided such causes and conditions. For example, someone that guided you or led you into the gate of Buddhism. It may seem to be quite spontaneous or something rather quite coincidental, but they're not coincidental at all. They're rather some very natural but real causes and conditions. For those reasons, you have encountered the correct Dharma. Maybe it's a book, maybe it's someone, or maybe it's certain changes. Look at those accomplished ones that we've studied so far. By relying on those kinds of causes and conditions, they can attain realization. Even by relying on the sensation of warmth, he attained realization. Maybe in the winter we can turn up the heat, but not too much heat. Because if there were to be a fire hazard, and then you attain realization, but how about the rest of them? But then you can't even stay here anymore. Fire hazard is something that we have to pay attention to. Nowadays, we have already changed the to a different electricity grid, so it is no longer a big problem. In the past, in the winter, we mainly rely on the yaks cow down. But now I don't really see people selling those dried cow downs anymore, nor yaks. The other day I went to the county and I asked the others, saying that nowadays we don't really see those cow downs anymore. Maybe the young lamas and jumos, they're not really using the cow down to be heated in the winter. So now we have electricity. Maybe electricity also works, as long as you can attain realization through warmth, and that's good. He continued to say that I produced a blazing brilliance and ascended to enlightenment. Not so sure what kind of realization that is. It's probably higher than our hardship because it is ascended to enlightenment. So this is the first one that is relying on the element of fire. Let's look at the next one. The 19th. That is by relying on the ground. So this bodhisattva maintaining the ground. The previous bodhisattvas, arhats, that appeared in the gathering of this sutra now started to appear over here. Now we finally know who they are. If you go back to the first volume, you should be able to see that, oh, this is how he attained realization, and this is his character. That's the role he plays, just like a movie. Because in the movie, usually at the beginning, there is a very simple description and introduction of a character, but then later you will get to know more about them. So the bodhisattva maintaining the ground arose from his seat, bowed at the Buddha's feet, and said to the Buddha, I remember when universal light, thus come one, appeared in the world in the past. I was a bhikshu who continually worked on making level the major roads, ferry landings, and the dangerous spots in the ground where the despair might hinder or harm carriages or horses. I did everything from building bridges to hauling sand. Now, this bodhisattva used to be a staff member. Sometimes I really worry that some of our staff members that serve the Sangha do not really engage in contemplation or practice or studies. And I would worry that, oh, too bad they spend so much time on staffing for the Sangha. What if they don't attain realization? But this afternoon, after reading this story of Bodhisattva maintaining ground, I was quite joyful, because I thought that not necessarily everyone has to engage in study and contemplation. If one were to spend lots of time in managing lots of constructions and building roads and all of those activities, they would also be able to attain realization too. Khenpo now is doing impressions of various staff members that works in mainly constructions and other areas like such.
有些就是说是，哎，这个不行啊，那你是为什么这样做啊？有些就女众也比较厉害的，所以天天都是灌这个功夫嘛。
If you were to engage in management of constructions, well, I don't want to do an impression of everyone, otherwise I have to make an impression of everybody. Okay, so let's look at the next part. Over here it says that he first arose from his seat and then prostrated to the Buddha, and then said that in the past he was studying in front of universal light, Tathagata. That was one of the 55 Buddhas.
但他呢，就是常常是去一些重要的这个路课啊、狮子路课啊，或者说是一些。
The Bodhisattva at that time was a bhikshu who continually worked on making level the major roads.
田地和这个路之间就是特别狭窄，就是狭小，就是这样的。
Or the kinds of dangerous spots where there are uneven roads or the roads that's very dangerous or narrow. He would mend those kinds of roads, level those roads, so that the roads would no longer create obstacles to the chariots, horses, and people walking on them. So he would flatten them, would mend them, and mainly in those construction works. Nowadays, in our Sangha, there's a group of members that works in the construction, in the designing, and in management, in supervising. I personally also know what their jobs entail. For example, even the roads and the steps and the little ponds and roads, the whole Larungar can unfold in front of my eyes. Each of the little bit of work, each of the little drop of sweat that we've had, and each of the bricks and the tiling that we've used, I know the hard work that it would take. So all of those people at the time of serving the Sangha, the effort that they make definitely would affect the effort they can take on to the study and contemplation and their practice. But then the merit, in fact, they can also get the merit that we would study, because look at Larungar. Compare our current infrastructure and our situation to 30 years ago. 30 years ago, in winter or summer, in rain or sun, whatever kinds of situation it is, the tutor would sit inside of the room, and the rest of the students, including us, would sit on the outside, sit in outdoor, and sit on ground to listen to the Dharma teachings. So nowadays, every parts of the infrastructure definitely got much, much better. And then he continued to say that he would make level of the major roads, and then ferry landings, to make bridges, as well as then take all kinds of supplies such as sand and cement and rocks and all kinds of things. Nowadays it's easier because we have machines. In the past, when we constructed the old shrine hall that we had, each of the sectors, the people living in each of the sectors of Larungar would send out a group of people to dig ground by hands. Even the road that we have, in fact, those roads were first dug by hand first. Lots of hard work were all done by people. Similarly, over here, the Bodhisattva maintaining the ground also did all of those hard work. And he did not do that only in front of one or two Buddhas. He did that in front of innumerable Buddhas.
然后呢，就是还有一些这个重视呢，就是在于这个什么这个什么换会的地方，换会是好像是不是街道？I
was diligent in this hard labor throughout the appearances of limitless Buddhas in the world. If there were beings at the walls and gates of the cities who needed someone to carry their goods, I would carry them all the way to their destination, set the things down, and leave without any recompense. Nowadays, I think lots of female members would also ask people to carry things for them. But of course, they're not free. They would request for some money. But the Bodhisattva over here, he would carry things for them and then set things down and also help those people for free. And later, when the Buddha Vipashin appeared in the world, there was a worldwide famine. I would carry people on my back, and no matter how far the distance, I would only accept one small coin. If there was an ox cart stuck in the mud, I would use my spiritual strength to push the wheels and get it out of difficulty. Buddha Vipashin is the last Buddha appeared in the last kalpa, that is the Vyuha kalpa. So the name Vipashin means pervading everywhere with ease. At that time, there was a great famine spreaded, and people would evacuate areas. And he, the Bodhisattva, would carry things for the beings, also would take them to distance, let it be near or far. And he would just take a little bit so that he can support his living, his livelihood. And then whenever he sees carts or oxen being strangled in mud, he would use his miraculous power to push them out so that they would be alleviated from this kind of suffering. And then he continued to say, once a king asked the Buddha to accept a vegetarian feast. At that time, I served the Buddha by leveling the road as he went. Vipashin, the Tathagata, then rubbed my crown and said, you should level your mind ground, then everything else in the world would be level. It was at the time that the Buddha set up a feast, and Buddha Vipashin was also on the way there. So the Bodhisattva at that time then leveled the ground. And then the Buddha, after the Buddha saw what he did, he touched the crown of the Bodhisattva and then blessed him, and then said that you should level your mind ground. Then everything else in the world would be leveled. According to Master Zixuan, he said that the mind is the reliant place of all phenomena. If our mind can be leveled, then the world can be leveled. If our mind is pure, then the world is pure. If the mind is leveled, the whole world would be leveled. We can try that. If our mind is leveled, if our mind can be at the same state all the time, then the world is also leveled. Even during the time of great chaos and warfare, even if they were to go through lots of difficulties and treacherous events, their minds would still be leveled. There would be no afflictions or fear or suffering. If your mind is not leveled, then the world cannot be leveled. Look at what Vladimir Putin is doing. His mind is not leveled, so the world is not leveled. But I'm sure some of you definitely like Vladimir Putin, and when I talk about the negatives of him, you probably would not get very happy. I'm sure some of you really appreciate Vladimir Putin because people's capacity and their roots are very different. And then he continued to say that immediately my mind opened up and I saw the particles of the earth composing my own body were no different from all the particles of earth that made up the world. He attained realization and he saw that all the particles that made his body is no other than the particles that made up the world. There is no difference. Everything just simply merged together. The dust of the particles of the body is no other than the external particles. Why is that? The nature of those particles of dust was such that they do not connect with one another, nor could they be touched by the blade of a sword. Since the nature of the particles are of emptiness, they are not connected with one another. So even if there was a knife or a sword to attack one, there is no benefit nor harm. This is similar to the story of Nagarjuna. After he attained a realization of emptiness, he said that you can use your knife to cut my head, and you would not be able to harm me because I have already eradicated the karmic retribution of such. The only way that you can harm me is by using kusha grass, because I still have the karmic debt from that. And then the Bodhisattva said that within the Dharma nature, I awakened to the patience with the non-production of dharmas and accomplished arhatship. I brought my mind back to the extent that I have now entered the ranks of the Bodhisattva. us. Hearing the thus come one proclaim the wonderful lotus flower, the level of the Buddha's knowledge and vision, I have already been certified as having understood, and I'm a leader in the assembly. Now, when it comes to the wonderful lotus flower, some of the commentaries said that this could refer to the Lotus Sutra. Usually, Lotus Sutra is the Vajrayana Lotus Sutra. He over here said that after I hear the teaching given by the Buddha, I have already been certified as having understood, and I'm a leader of the assembly. So proclaimed the wonderful lotus flower could show that this is a sign or a stage of realization. Now within the Great Assembly, he then can certify through his own realization or his own practice. So he attained realization through the element that is earth, that is ground. And then the Buddha asked about perfect penetration. Upon attentive contemplation of the body and the environment, I saw that the two dusts are exactly the same, that fundamentally everything is the treasury of the thus come one, but that an empty falseness arises and creates dust. When the dust is eliminated, wisdom is perfected, and one accomplishes the unsurpassed way. This is the foremost method. In fact, when I made the observation with wisdom, the dust of body and world has no difference. It is simply a manifestation of Tathagata. So at the time of recognizing such illusory dust, then I had perfected wisdom and attained the unsurpassed path. So for me, the best and foremost method is earth, is ground. So let's stop here today.
Zhibun Tsonen Zhuwa Zhuwa Zhuwa